Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Bufnagle the podcast, where we explore entertaining and enlightening discussions of the adventure of life and all things good. From science and technology to history and philosophy to leadership and success. We hope to give you a better understanding of the world and skills for everyone to pursue their own adventure.
Yeah, sometimes those things happen. All right.
All right. Well, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Bufnagle the podcast, where we talk about all things good in the pursuit of Rafe's adventure across Europe. I keep saying, we have this introduction that we've kept from Zach of his welcome back to Bufnagle the podcast. And then about 20 seconds later, you hear me say the same thing. And frankly, I don't think I should be saying the same thing. It'll be something new every single week.
Well, you know what?
I provide variety to the variety podcast.
Well, that is the risk that that's the risk we take, right? And it could be that you're providing something awesome, and it could be that you fail and fall flat on your face. But the listeners will know how things end up, and that's how it is, right? We don't restrict you to a script. We allow you to use your expertise to run free in the world of the buff. So
you have a script here. I do not.
Well, I do have a
that's
script,
what makes
but
it great.
It's more of an outline. So yes.
But what about those listeners? What do you provide them, and what do they provide us?
These listeners are great because they made us a global top 10% podcast, and they know they can always reach us at bufnagle.com. And remember, if you are listening now, you are one of them, and you need to share the love, share the buff, give us a 5-star review, subscribe, likes, hit the smiley stars, tell a friend to listen, and you will get a free episode. And Harry, like I said, it's always a great day to be doing a podcast with you, and we are back in the second episode to discuss the actual details of the European summer schools, plural.
Yeah, Rafe's 8-week-long vacation.
His diligent pursuit of knowledge is really what it was.
Yeah, we meaning the family and I have all made fun of you.
Yes, you have. It's been
what you have
unrelenting.
Done,
it's unrelenting.
And the pictures, yes, absolutely unrelenting. Well, if it wasn't, what would it be?
Well, it would be. Well, it would not be my home. It would not be the buff. So it is all good because it's all good. It is all good. Right. All right. So last time we talked about the first week or so of being in Bar in Alsace in France, and we ended on the idea. It was an incredible time there in Bar. Certainly that first week of seeing all the things that were there. Toward the end of the first week, we went back to Strasburg. Harry, I mentioned Strasburg a couple episodes ago, and the cathedral there. And we saw all sorts of wonderful things in Strasburg. We saw more than just the cathedral. We saw a number of other churches there, and there was a little bit of I guess it was a lament maybe that I had in Strasburg when I went back there, and that was that there was so much to see in the cathedrals and the churches that we visited outside. I mean, they're beautiful churches, and it was I lamented a little bit that there's not as much, I guess I'll call it church literacy that could be. And there are a lot of things there in the artwork, in the stained glass, in the reliefs carved into the stone, that people just don't know the stories. And that struck me as an odd thing because we spend a lot of time talking about those kinds of stories, but not everybody does. Yep. And there's a real opportunity there, I think, for understanding what the people then believed by understanding their stories. And you don't have to believe them. All right. We've said this before. God exists whether you believe in him or not. And but there's the stories are there. And if you want to understand the culture, if you want to understand the architecture, if you want to understand the world that they lived in, then you should really learn those stories.
Well, yeah, that's true. And there's I don't know if you've been watching, but Jordan Peterson came out and he's got a quote that says, like, why must you understand history? Why must you study history? Well, because you are a product of history. All of these things came before you and in some way manifested themselves into this unique path that produced you. Therefore, you do your own due diligence to understand where you came from.
Yeah, and I heard I was reading another similar line last week. I forget who said this, but the idea was like, why do you have to study history? And well, you have to frame where you are against something, and you can't frame it against the future because it's not there yet, and that leaves you to frame it against the past, and you have to measure yourself relative to them. You have to say what were they doing, how were they doing, what would I have done, and it's very easy to get chronological snobbery, to say that because I came later, I'm somehow better. But the real enlightened way to see that is these were people just like you, and they had challenges, they had joys, they had sorrows, they had all of the things that you have, but they had them in a subtly different world. And it's important to know what they were thinking, what they were doing, that allowed them to create the greatness that they left for us. People worked hundreds of years to leave us some of these things, and
right.
And
well, we've talked about the human condition is the same, no matter where you are in history.
Right, and the only thing you have is you have to measure yourself against your time. So, anyway, that's the thing. So I had a little lament there, but it was a great time because we got to discuss these things and share what we knew, and other people shared what they knew, and all around it was a great educational experience. The cathedral there, Harry, contains what's called an astronomical clock, which is a large mechanical. Well, it's a clock, and it tracks not just the time of the day and rings at the quarter hours and the top of the hour, but it also tracks what day of the year it is. It adjusts for the Gregorian calendar. It tells you the phase of the moon. It tells you where the sun is. It tells you like all the planetary orbits. It is a wonderful thing to see it function and to see all those little days pointed to. It's just this big wheel that has all the days of the year on it. And for leap years, it does an adjustment for leap years. And this magical thing happens on February 29th to make it adjust.
The Wizard of Oz is back there messing with the hands.
Yes. Pay no attention to the man behind the curtain. So it's a great construction. It is an interesting thing in the sense that it helps you understand the arrival of what I'll call the clockwork universe mental model of the cosmos, the idea that we are all just clocks spinning around. And it starts to point to an age where understanding how some of these cyclic things worked changed man's relationship to the cosmos. When things became very understandable, they lose their awe, and then suddenly you can start feeling pretty good about yourself, and maybe sometimes not justifiably.
Yeah, you end up kind of feeling complacent of, well, I know everything, so what else should I do?
Yes, right. I know everything, so therefore I don't have to rely on anything outside of me, and that's the Enlightenment is coming, Harry, and that is that will be an episode sometime. I'll leave the what should I call it? The trailer to that episode is the concept of the Enlightenment and the Dark Ages is perhaps the greatest PR scam in history. So I'll just leave it at that, and we'll leave the listeners to come back for that. We climbed the bell tower of the cathedral. It was a long way up, a lot of steps, narrow passageways.
I would hope an equal number of steps on the way back down.
Yeah, I think so. I think I might have jumped the last one just to keep a few. Yeah, you don't want to have you don't want to have small numbers of steps on the way down. You want
That's right.
Almost exactly the same number. They used to have parties and stuff, Harry, back in the Middle Ages, up on top of that thing, picnics and gatherings and civic festivals all around. These were major components of their lives, and this cathedral's been there for hundreds of years, and you might as well make use of what you have.
When's the last time they had a party?
Well, we had a party up there. You can go up there and you can get drinks and stuff up there on top of the cathedral.
Oh, fun!
Yeah, it was great. It was a great time. So, and the trip ended up with a quiet afternoon tea, soda, coffee, beer, whatever it was, at a coffee shop or a pub kind of place.
Cafe.
It's probably a cafe, but I think there was more cafe outside than there was inside. So it's hard to say we were in a cafe. We were kind of at a cafe.
It's interesting. I don't know if you had this when you were in France and Belgium and Bruges or wherever you were, but I know in Albania, they would do coffee shop in the morning, turn bar in the evening. And that's pretty much how everything operated.
That's like a mullet haircut, right? It was like,
Yeah.
business in the front, party in the back.
Yes, I don't know if it was the same there for you, or if France is a little bit more sophisticated.
I'm trying to think about that. I think I think it has the same level of sophistication, and I think it just was. I think it probably was coffee. Yeah, it was coffee in the morning, and it switched to serving whatever the appropriate beverage was at whatever time of day. So it was, and it's interesting how conversations turn. So we had been in bar about almost a week at this point, and by this time there were discussions of. My recollection is the discussion was basically theology, the nature of God and man, and how that all relates to architecture in the Middle Ages.
Bufnagle, the podcast in person.
Yes, that's exactly what it was, Harry. I didn't tell anybody. I was just reciting old episodes to them. So, but the lesson was this to me from that day to Strasburg was that meet people where they are and love them there, and make sure that you're always seeking truth and you're seeking their good, which is the path they follow to become the people they were created to be. So if you keep your focus on that, you will hopefully stay humble, and you will provide good to them, and you will be doing the work that you were called to do. So it was a great trip to Strasburg. We got back late that night on the train, and then we did it again the next day with the things, the studying, the drawing, all those interesting things. There was a museum in Bar that we went to later that week. One thing I discovered, there was a thermometer on the wall, one of these big, it was all ostentatious and, little swirly whirlies and angels holding up thermometers. And it was a barometer thermometer combo weather unit thing. And it had temperatures, Harry, not in degrees Fahrenheit, not in degrees Celsius, not in Kelvin, but in degrees Reaumur. And he was a French guy. I had to go look this back. I thought I knew him, and I had realized I had forgotten, but he did degrees such that water freezes at 0 and it boils at 80.
Ah, yes.
And okay, so I'm thinking about this now. It boils at 80, and I'm wondering if there was a reason it boiled at 80, if he discovered something that happened at about 100. Because remember our friend Fahrenheit, if you remember our metric episode, Fahrenheit set 100 at body temperature, human body temperature. And he put 0 as the coldest temperature he could create in the lab with like salt and ice, different salts and ice. And I wonder if Reaumur had water boiling at 80 because
the hottest thing that he could make was at 100?
Yeah, no. I just wonder if there was a thing that's I'll have to do the math on this to figure out what that temperature would be. But maybe, I don't know, maybe glass melted at 100. I don't know. Something happened that he couldn't get past that. And then when he did that, it was like, well, water's at about 80. I'll set water at 80 and we'll go. And that gives, you can't measure a thing unless you have a ruler bigger than the thing. So,
right. Yep.
And I think we had this discussion. I had a professor in graduate school that thought if anybody got a 100 on a test, then the test was insufficient because you might be, you might have knowledge that you could demonstrate, but the ruler, the test, couldn't measure that high. So, like if you try to measure the heights of all the people at work, Harry, and you bring a 12-inch ruler and try to measure how tall they are, everyone will measure at more than 1 foot. And it won't do a very good job. So you need to have a ruler that is bigger than the biggest thing you're trying to measure. Yep. And maybe our friend Reaumur was going in that direction by putting 80 there for water boiling. All right, maybe that's an episode. Look up Reaumur if you want to do. Hey, if you'd like to be on the Buff,
and you'd like to be a special guest.
Yes, we'll have Amateur Day on the Buff because that'll differ completely from what we're doing. All right. So, and then the other days, of course, we would do what we always did there in Bar. We would draw and we would measure and discuss how to translate what we saw into something on the page. It was like, for me, it was like writing, like elementary writing class, but with detailed pictures. So I was learning how to do all these things that a lot of the other guys already knew how to do. July 6th was a big field trip day. We did all sorts of things here. We had like 4 cars that carried all of us little students all around the French countryside. We visited a limestone quarry. And you're like, yeah, okay, yeah, right. Limestone. Well, limestone is awesome because it's used to.
It's organic.
No, it's not. Well, it's from organic.
It's organic material.
Yes, yeah. It's from organic things process it, right? So if you are a snail or a crustacean or a mollusk, basically mollusks, then you suck the calcium out of the water, you use it to make a shell, you die, and you drop it on the ground, and now it becomes a stone. And that sits there for hundreds of millions of years, and then the French come along and dig it up. And this quarry that we visited had been there for 500 years, and it will likely last another 250 years at the current rate they're going. So it wasn't particularly big, I didn't think. I mean, I've seen, have you ever driven through Chicago on on 294, you go past this gigantic quarry, and this was nothing compared to that. This was just a little, your little neighborhood quarry.
I'll just go head down to the limestone and pick up some rocks today.
Yeah. Well, and then what you do when the quarry is empty, when all the valuable rocks have been pulled from the quarry fills with water, and you have a swimming hole. So, all right, that's
two birds, one stone.
Yes,
or no stones.
Well, you get rid of the stones, but you have dead birds. So that's how you spend those things. Beneath the limestone there lies the desired pink, the desired pink sandstone, which is highly prized by by locals and by the government of France. So there's a limit to how far they can dig because this pink limestone is used in all sorts of very fancy things in France. Now, this was the interesting thing, though. So to process limestone, what you do is you dig up this stone, and then it tends to have clay nearby because, right, it's sat on the bottom of the ocean. And so, other things die down there too. And you get clay. So you knock the clay off the limestone, and then you burn this limestone. You don't really burn the limestone. You burn coke, which is a kind of coal. You burn coke with the limestone. It gets the limestone real hot. And you put it in they have these stacks. They're called stacks. And they're gigantic funnels that are probably 3 or 4 meters across and 10 meters high. So this is like the height of your house.
Yep.
And the size of a small room in your house filled with limestone. And then you throw some limestone in there, and then you throw some coke in there. And what happens, it's like a funnel. The coke burns, and it heats the limestone and drives off the water and the carbon dioxide. And what happens then is the limestone tends to crumble. It becomes dehydrated lime or something like that. And it turns into a powder. It becomes very soft, and it kind of falls to the bottom and falls out the bottom. And then they scoop that up, and then they take it back into this building, and they spray water on it, which tends, it's called washing the limestone. And then they, any limestone that hasn't broken, when you put the water on it, it tends to break further, and it becomes this powder. So you get this kind of partially hydrogenated limestone, something like that. Patrick will fix me on this. I'm sure he'll write in and tell me how I got this wrong. And then not your cousin Patrick, the Patrick from the class will get this right. But anyway, you crush and filter this stuff. You get it really small, like a micron, and now you have lime that you can use to make stuff. Okay, so they add white sand to this to make it basically all the same color. You add some pigments. Bingo, you got something you can sell. And you take this lime, then you mix it with water, and essentially you get a plaster. You get a cementatious kind of thing that when it reacts with the water, it releases all that heat that was there in the fires. It's an exothermic reaction at that point. And you use it to make mortar, or to make, I don't know, you can make a road out of it. You can make anything. You can make some plaster kinds of things. But those are, there are a lot of different reactions that are like this, but we'll have Patrick on at a different time to talk about all these different ones, because that's a chemistry class that's beyond the scope of this text. How about that? All right. We visited a stonemason. This guy repairs old arches, old buildings that had big rocks in them. They take the rocks out, they fix them up. They make glue with some lime, a new piece onto this rock, and then carve it up, or they may just replace the rock. Very heavy stones, very loud in there, with hammers going against chisels, knocking rocks apart. Very dusty, but very awesome. It was a good thing. So I learned that layered sandstone has grain like wood, which is kind of interesting.
Layered. Yep.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And so you have to, when you carve the limestone, you have to think about how it's going to go onto the building so that you can orient the grain to properly support weight. So, so like when you take a board and you put it vertically, it has better strength vertically than if you put it horizontally, and it would bend and then Stones do the same thing. They have grain in them, so you have to respect that when you build things. And we saw some places where there had been failures of certain stones because they'd been put in, I don't know, sideways. Okay, so we visited a wood guy. This was very fun for me, of course. He had a big shop, 2-car garage, about and then
I was going to say, like this is your thing, and all the other students were probably, there's chemistry things going on, and there's stone things going on, and this is how the architecture work. And suddenly, you probably go into the wood shop, and you're like, oh, this.
Yes, I had a great time in
this there. This is my spot.
Yes, we talked about these. How should I say it? I got along well with this guy. I think he was just a great guy. He works in this essentially 2-car garage with some extra office space and stuff. I don't know, maybe 1,200 square feet. It's hard for me to know. I don't know how many square meters that is. 12. I don't know. No, it was like 120 or 12. I don't know. It was the size of a very large 2-car garage. He does what would you call it? Period authentic door and window repair. So if you are living in some of these houses in the Alsace area and you need a door or you need new windows, the wooden structure pieces, the jambs and the lintels and the sills, he does that kinds of things. And he works in his shop, Harry, with his daughter, who is, I don't know, 30-ish, about the same age as you guys are. And it was just a wonderful little family affair. He rebuilt his shop 15 years ago after a fire destroyed it, which was very sad, he said. And he said to me, I said, what's it like? How are you enjoying your life as woodworker guy in your shop, making doors with your daughter? How is that going? And he said, this is my, he said it kind of like broken English to me. He spoke mostly French, right? But he did speak a little bit of English. He was much better. His English infinitely better than my French. He said, this is my shop. And he reiterated that. He said, my shop. And he said, I am at peace, with this big grin. And that struck a chord with me, because I never would have thought to say I am at peace in that setting. I would have thought to say something like, I really enjoy my work, or I look forward to going to work, and like, you never work a day in your life if you enjoy what you do, that kind of thing. I was expecting the cat poster kinds of things, but yep. He said, I am at peace. And he had this big grin on his face. And this is a guy that was doing his craft, the thing that he was called to do. And he's been doing it for years now. He's working the materials of the world for the betterment of man. And I thought that's such a wonderful thing. And I thought it would be, really good if we could all do that. He wasn't looking to be the king of woodworking. He wasn't trying to set up woodworking.com, become the Amazon of woodworking. He was just a master craftsman doing daily the work of tending the garden, of turning the things of the earth into things that create beauty, goodness, and truth. And it was just a wonderful experience chatting with this guy.
Yeah, I don't know if I brought it up on the podcast, or maybe it was when I was talking to Nick from Catholic Manhood, or just things that I've been reading. But there's something to be said for either being at peace or understanding and coming to terms with the mundane. And I'm not saying that woodworking is boring and obsolete and anything else. I'm just saying that it is every single day. He probably does more or less the same thing. And you have to be at peace doing that and recognize that you're at peace doing that in order to be fulfilled in life.
Yes.
And I saw another quote the other day that said, our grandparents, so probably your parents, definitely your grandparents, used to be physically exhausted at the end of the day, but their minds were fresh.
Yes.
Right. And they were happy. They were content. They were at peace. And nowadays, people's bodies are physically relieved because they don't have to do as much physical labor anymore, but their minds are in chaos.
Yeah, and I don't think he suffered that. He had such joy in showing us everything he did. In fact, all of these craftsmen, and we saw this guy and some other guys, and there's some other guys to talk about, that all of them they just radiated this. You're like when you go to somebody's house and like, let me show you something really, really cool. They're bubbling over with this joy. Nobody was nobody was lackadaisical. Nobody was put off by us being there. They were very eager to show us what they do on a day-to-day basis. And you talk about what is the state of being mundane? Is that mundanity?
Mundancy?
Mundancy? So,
I don't know.
But a lot of people, and I think a lot of people have lives where it's not very exciting. It's not very exciting.
And that's okay.
And it's okay. Right. There are a lot. Being a parent is a lot like that. I'm sure you see that you do stuff every day. You go to work and you do some of these things, and sometimes it's kind of exciting, but most of the time it's, I answer emails, I write reports, I go to meetings, I do it again. I do it again. I do it again. But you hope that what you're doing at the end of the day does, what did I say here? What you end up working the materials of the world for the betterment of man. And that's what we all ought to seek to do. And if you're doing that, how can you not find joy in that? And if you're finding joy, you get joy, Harry, by being on the path that points toward your good. And if you are on that path, all shall be well. That's the trick, is find the path. Find the path. And these guys they all found the path. All right. We met with another stone guy in the afternoon. He had some robotic machines, and they would set up the machine to do most of the robotic carving would be done. Almost all of the carving was done robotically, but then the craftsman would come in and finish these things because it's actually difficult for the machines to do some of those things. It was different technology, certainly more advanced than the other guy. And there's, that leads to questions. Where do we draw the line with craftsmanship? I can go to my workshop and I can have the computer run the router machine and do all the work for me. And then I become a computer guy and not a wood guy.
Yeah, but
right?
then it's like, how much are you going to say? Like, well, I used power tools for this, so am I really doing the work? Or I used a handsaw for this. Okay, cool. Why didn't you cut it with your teeth?
Right. Well, that's the thing. We're always using technology, and the question is, why do we have to stop with the technology in 1650? Why is it okay to use high strength steel in our chisels? Can we do that? Is that okay? And I think the answer is yes, you can. But I think what's really important is making sure you recognize that it's not art if the machine just makes it up, because you can sculpt you sculpt the flower, or you sculpt the I'm working on a picture frame, and I'm carving words into the picture frame, and I'm tempted to see whether or not I can actually carve flowers and leaves into my picture frame. Right. But the thing is, if the machine does that, the machine won't have joy of getting it right and won't feel sorrow or remorse of getting it wrong. The machine doesn't know that the flower is beautiful. The machine doesn't know you've created something that reflects something beautiful. And if the machine doesn't know that, I'm not certain that that's a piece of art. And that's why you say like
what AI, if I created the machine and I set up the specifications and I programmed it and I did all of the work to do it.
Right.
Well, then am I allowed to feel?
Well, then I'll say the machine's a piece of art.
Right.
All right. And that's like we've talked a lot about AI, and now we're rubbing right up against that same topic. Is if AI does these things, is it, if AI writes a sonnet, okay, great. It writes a sonnet and you made it do a thing that is very interesting, but it doesn't know the pounding in your chest when you speak to someone that you adore. It doesn't know that feeling. It doesn't know that component of the human condition. It doesn't know the sorrow felt by Mary in the Pietà. It can't know that, but Michelangelo knows of that, and that art points to that component of the human condition, and the machine is not doing that. The machine is following a set of instructions that are written in binary and uploaded through the cloud. So it's not quite the same thing. So anyway, the last stop on the tour was great. It was a clay tile factory. So if you have here in the States, we do a lot of asphalt shingles, which, they are what they are, right? But this factory made clay roof tiles. So it's a family business that has been in the family for at least 4 generations. There are 7 employees working in this old factory in this little town. I forget exactly where it was. And this was a wonderful tour because the factory was so dangerous. It was really funny. It was, there were little ladders you climb up to go to this area to work on this machine. And this was a place for grownups, right? This was a serious place doing serious work. And these guys knew what they were doing, turning essentially materials of the earth into pieces of buildings through the magic of making clay and then shaping tiles and then, and then baking them and storing them and seasoning them and all this other kinds of stuff you have to do to make clay tiles, to make roofs. And there were 2 pieces that were excellent about this tour. One was that, it was a master class in craftsmanship. This guy he knew everything about, he's probably my age. He's been doing clay tiles since you were doing stats. Before I was doing stats, Harry. He's been doing tiles forever. So he knew everything about tiles, where to get the right dirt, how to mix it to get this kind of consistency or that kind of thing. He had all the knowledge of a fine craftsman. But the second thing that was great, it was a master class in presentation. He had gone before. This was a Saturday. I think it was a Saturday. This was a Saturday, and they weren't open. They were, the other employers were gone. He had gone around the shop and mapped out what the tour was going to be, and he had pieces waiting at all of these different stations. He would say, "Let me show you how this machine works," and he'd pull off this plastic wrap that had some clay tiles that were at that stage of production, and then he would run the machine for that little piece. And you would see how he would do this. And his wife came and helped when there was a 2-person job. They did this together. He had a thing where he was like, well, sometimes we make molds and we put the clay in the mold. And so here's an example of a mold. This was like a cooking show, Harry. Here's an example of the mold. This is what the mold looks like. And then what we do is we put the clay in the mold.
And we chop up the onions and chop the onions.
Yeah. And then we mix it up. And then he put that aside and he said, after we bake it, we pull it out of the mold. And he had another one he had already set up that he had baked. And he was like, and you pull it out like this. And he was like, gets the mold off the thing. It pops out. And here's this beautiful flower ornament mold thing that he had done. It was it was a masterclass in presentation of a process. And every bit of it, he showed us. He showed us how they mix the clay to make it the right consistency. He showed us how the tiles come out of the extruder. He showed us how they get cut, how they get shaped, how they get baked. He showed us the whole thing. I was just in awe of this guy. And he was, and he's my age, he's late 50s or 60, something like that. And he's thinking, I got to retire, but it's hard because it's difficult to get people who want to do the work. And he's been in that factory forever, and it was a wonderful place. Like I said, it was a scary place because it was a little bit dangerous, but it was real. It was a real place. You weren't standing there in a hazmat suit behind the yellow line, and all the lights were flashing, and there were big. No, you were right there.
OSHA wasn't standing outside the factory waiting to shut them down.
There was no OSHA there. It was great. And all of these businesses, they're all growing. The roof tile guy, that business, they can't keep up with demand. The stone guys said we're working nonstop. The timber framing guys, the wood, they all had more orders than they could fill. But the issue is that entry into this space for young people wanting to do this work is really difficult due to lack of patience. Right? People want to do this quickly and they want to get going. The world outside of the small towns in France is exciting. It's new, it's novel, it's worldly and all that. And a small factory in France, it may be peaceful, but that doesn't appeal well to young people. It's starting to appeal to you now, I bet, a lot more than it did 15 years ago.
I even asked Jamie that tonight. I said, are you still okay living with where we are? And how many chickens and cows do you want?
And bees. Don't forget the bees.
And bees. Well, she wants the bees on the other acre.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's true, right? You get older and you kind of want these patient things, and the rush for immediate gratification is not as gratifying.
Yeah.
It feels a lot more empty when it's just handed to you.
Right. Or when you're doing something that's like, when you're doing something that doesn't feel real. What do? Well, I take numbers, I put them in a spreadsheet, and I give them to my boss, and he uploads them, and then we get the report. You remember? Do you remember the movie City Slickers? Have you ever seen City Slickers?
Yes,
have I talked about? Yeah. That's what it is. I don't. No, I don't work at the radio station. I sell airtime to advertisers. I mean, it's an empty. It can feel, the modern world can feel very empty, and the trick to getting to peace is to find something that is real, and
it's probably to connect back to the world.
Yeah, and I think this is hard work. Okay, and the people I was there, a lot of the students in Bar and in Bruges when we got there were craftsmen. They were people that do these things by hand. They were seamstresses, or they were stonemasons, or things like that. And these people do real work with their hands in real time for real people, and it provides a different kind of joy and peace than uploading digital content to the web.
Yeah.
So I said, I was talking to people about this, and I said, this is hard. It's not a path to cheap imitation. A modern way to look at this in terms of efficiency based on economic utility. So how can I make more tiles per hour? How can I make more wooden doors per hour? That's a focus on economic utility, but it can be short-sighted, and it can be misfocused. And part of the way to realize that is there is value simply in working. There is value in that, right? And there's value in hard work, right? And there's also value in hard work done well. So it's not a univariate problem with just economic utility. So there's a place for modern machinery, but there's also a place for expertise. You can take a guy came into the wood store the other day, and he was asking. He just didn't have any knowledge. He had none, and it was very. I didn't know how to approach him to talk about these things but he recognized he was like, I don't know anything. I need a saw. I need to know how to pick the wood. I need to know how to design a cabinet. All of these things he was missing. And I know how to do those things, at least at a certain level, but how long did it take me to get there? And he's just starting. And I was like, I could sell him a $1,500 table saw, but that's not what he needs right now. Right.
Well, that's like the classic example of, your little leaguer who thinks that he needs the $200 bat. But dude, if you're batting 400 and already, or little league, if you're batting 200 and your bat's only going to get you to 210, you should probably focus on learning how to swing and read a pitch.
Yeah. Well, right. And those are things you can learn that you don't need that. Sometimes you can, I guess I'll say, you can purchase expertise, right? Like I know when I played a lot more golf, one of my golf buddies said that, he said, you really need some shoes. I said, what do you mean? He said, well, your feet are slipping. Every time you swing, your feet slip. And and that's producing inconsistency. And that's one, that's not the only reason you're spraying the ball all over the course. But he said that'll help you. That's a thing you can do. And so you can get the kid a good bat. It's got to be a good bat. He's got to have a glove, and he probably needs some cleats so he doesn't slip. But he doesn't need, he needs to spend time in the field practicing and getting better. And that pathway for a lot of young people is one they don't want to do. It's a lot easier to, be an influencer on TikTok or something like that. But even those guys, they work at it. The good ones work at it.
Well, the high end ones. Yep.
Yeah. Yes, they do.
That's why they always say the top 0.1% or 0.01% is so highly paid. It's because they're very good at what they do.
Right.
And there's, no discredit or credit to us. I'm not sure which. There's a reason why we're not in the top 10 podcast of all time.
We're not in top 10. We're in top 10%, but we're not the top 10. All right. But that's the thing. As part of that is also, what is your intent? All right. The woodworker guy was at peace in his shop. Why? Because he had joy, and he had peace because he was on the path toward his good. He was doing the thing that he was made to do. And this podcast is doing what it's made to do here in this sense. It's talking about the good, giving people an opportunity to share their stories. And, we've been doing this over 4 years now, and it has a following, which is great. 3
years.
How many? We got 200 episodes, right?
Oh, yeah. I can't math. 4 years. That's also consistent on this episode.
So there we go. Yeah, that's right. Harry can't math. So but we're doing what we're seeking to do. Now, if we wanted to go out and do those things, well, we would work really hard at that, right? We would invest in the super duper microphones, and we would spend time going to marketing this and that, and we would spend a lot of time doing those things. But you know what? That's not where I want to be. That would not necessarily give me joy. That's not going to, I do want to spend more time in my shop. I want to spend time making my homestead beautiful. I want to make sure my grandkids are all growing up to be the people they should be. And I want to make sure, make sure my life has joy. I want to be on the path. Right now I'm on the path, right? Sometimes it's a little bumpy, but I'm on the path where I need to be. And I think these craftsmen point out that we need to be satisfied. We shouldn't be satisfied with, I guess I'll call it IKEA mediocrity. We need to try to get to expertise. We need to try to get there, right? And the expertise should be measured relative to what you're trying to do. So,
yeah,
there we are. That's toward the end of bar. We have a little bit more to discuss next time, but we're going to leave that for the next episode, Harry, where we will talk about a couple more things in bar and the final wrap up there, and then we'll move on into Germany, and then we'll make our way to Belgium, but not until next week at the earliest.
Yeah, it sounds like we're trapezing all the way across Europe at this point.
We are. It's kind of a little sliver. We'll go up the Rhine, and then a little bit toward the North Sea is where we're headed. So,
well, that's good. All right. Well, in the meantime, we hope and remind everyone to seek the good, live virtuously, and flourish, and enjoy the adventure of life. It's going to be a great day.